It's one of the biggest questions in human evolution, a real mystery. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals lived across Europe and Asia. They were smart, they were tough, they were survivors, and then we showed up. Homo sapiens, modern humans, more or less, we came out of Africa and spread across the globe. For a while, maybe 10,000 years, we shared the land with our stocky, heavy-browed cousins. And then, they were gone. All of them. The obvious, dramatic answer is that we killed them. It's a story that makes a kind of dark sense. A war for the world. Two types of human, one winner. We imagine brutal conflicts in icy valleys, clever sapiens with their throwing spears outmaneuvering the brute force of the Neanderthals. A prehistoric genocide, it's a powerful image. But is it true? Did we hunt Neanderthals to extinction? The short answer is probably not. At least, not in the simple way we might imagine. The real story is, like most things in the deep past, a lot more complicated. It's messier, slower, and maybe even a little sadder than a straightforward war. It's a story with many parts. It involves climate, food, technology, numbers, and even sex. It wasn't a single event, it was a long, slow fade. To understand what happened, we first have to get rid of the old stereotype. The Neanderthal was not a dumb, grunting caveman. That image comes from early reconstructions that were just wrong. They were based on the skeleton of an old Neanderthal man who was riddled with arthritis. He was stooped and broken, but a healthy Neanderthal in their prime was a powerhouse. They were shorter and stockier than us, with a barrel chest and thick bones. This was a great adaptation for living in a cold climate. A compact body retains heat better. Their skulls were different too. They had a long, low cranium, a projecting mid-face, and that famous brow ridge. But inside that skull was a brain that was, on average, slightly larger than our own. Brain size isn't a perfect measure of intelligence, but it tells you they were not simple-minded. The evidence they left behind proves it. Neanderthals were skilled toolmakers. They used a technique called the Levallois method, which is pretty sophisticated. It involves carefully preparing a core of stone before striking off a perfect flake to use as a spear point or a scraper. This takes foresight and skill. They were expert hunters. They took down huge animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant cave bears. This wasn't a reckless charge. It required planning, cooperation, and courage. They were hunting these massive beasts up close with heavy thrusting spears. You have to be smart and work as a team to do that and survive. They had culture. We have found Neanderthal sites with evidence of burials. In some cases, bodies were placed in pits deliberately. This suggests they had some concept of death, some ritual, they cared for their sick and injured. We have found skeletons of Neanderthals who survived for years with debilitating injuries. They had broken bones, missing teeth, and severe arthritis. They could not have survived on their own. Someone in their group had to be feeding them, protecting them. That's empathy. That's a complex social bond. They might have had a sense of beauty. There's evidence they used eagle talons as jewelry and coated shells in pigment. They used red ochre, a natural pigment, though we aren't exactly sure what for. Was it body paint? Ritual? We don't know. But it's a sign of symbolic thought, the ability to give meaning to things. They weren't just surviving, they were living. For 300,000 years, they were the dominant form of human in Eurasia. They were a success story. Then, around 45,000 years ago, we entered the picture. Homo sapiens, coming from the south. We were different. We were taller, leaner. Our bodies were built for warmer climates and for endurance running. Our skulls were more rounded, our faces flatter, with a chin that Neanderthals lacked. And we brought with us a new way of doing things. The first big difference was our technology. While Neanderthals were masters of their Mousterian toolkit, we arrived with something new, often called the Aurignacian culture. Our stone tools were often made from long, thin blades struck from a core. This was a more efficient use of stone. We made tools from bone, antler, and ivory, creating things like needles with eyes for sewing clothes. This meant better, more fitted clothing to survive the cold. And we had projectile weapons. This is a huge deal. A Neanderthal had to get close to a mammoth to kill it with a heavy spear. That's incredibly dangerous. We had spear throwers, or atlatls. This is basically a stick that acts as a lever, letting you throw a light spear or dart much farther and with much more force. Suddenly, you can hunt dangerous animals from a safe distance. It's less risky and more efficient. You get more reward for less risk. We also had a different kind of mind, it seems. We were obsessed with symbols. All across Europe, in the caves we occupied, we left behind stunning art. Paintings of horses, bison, and lions that seemed to move on the cave walls. We carved small statues, the so-called Venus figurines. We made beads and pendants. This symbolic explosion suggests a different way of thinking, of communicating complex ideas about the world, about our place in it, about our group identity. It probably went hand in hand with more sophisticated language. So, this is the setup. The established cold adapted Neanderthals and the new lanky, technologically innovative Homo sapiens. Both smart, both capable hunters. What happened when they met? Let's look at the direct violence theory first. The idea of a war. If there was a systematic campaign to wipe out the Neanderthals, we should find evidence. We should find Neanderthal skeletons with spear points made by sapiens embedded in them. We should find ancient battlefields littered with the bones of both species. But we don't. The archaeological record is almost silent on this. There are very, very few examples of a Neanderthal who was clearly killed by a modern human. There is one case, a Neanderthal from Shenadar Cave in Iraq, who has a rib injury that might have been caused by a thrown projectile, something sapiens were good at. But it's one case and the interpretation is debated. Likewise, there's a sapien skeleton from Romania with a head injury that some have argued was inflicted by a Neanderthal. Again, it's one possible case. If there was a war that lasted for thousands of years and drove an entire species to extinction, the evidence should be everywhere. It should be obvious, but it isn't. It seems that while violence between individuals or small groups probably did happen, humans are humans after all. It wasn't the main driver of their disappearance. There was no Great War. The dramatic story of us hunting them down just doesn't fit the facts we have. So, if we didn't kill them in battle, what happened? The answer is likely something more subtle. A process of being outcompeted. It wasn't a fast and bloody war. It was a long, slow ecological struggle. A war of attrition fought over thousands of years, on 100 different fronts. The first front was resources. Both Neanderthals and sapiens were hunting the same animals and gathering the same plants. They needed the same sheltered caves to live in. They needed the same sources of fresh water. They were in direct competition. And in a competition, even a tiny advantage can be decisive over a long period of time. Think about the hunting technology, the atlatl. A group of sapiens hunters could bring down more game with less risk than a group of Neanderthal hunters. That means more food for the same amount of effort. It means fewer hunting accidents, fewer prime-age adults getting gored by a bison. Over generations, this small advantage would add up. The sapiens groups would be better fed, healthier, and have more surviving members. Then there's the social aspect, the art, the beads, the ornaments. These things aren't just pretty. They are social glue, they are markers of identity, they help to define who is in your group and who is not. They can be traded, cementing alliances between different groups. The evidence suggests that sapiens lived in larger, more interconnected social networks. If one group had a bad year, if the reindeer herd they followed moved away, they could rely on relatives or allies in the next valley for help. Neanderthals seem to have lived in smaller, more isolated groups. Their stone tools are usually made from rock found within a few dozen kilometers of their homes. Sapiens tools, on the other hand, are sometimes made from materials transported hundreds of kilometers. So, this points to long-distance trade and communication. This wider social network was like an insurance policy. It made sapiens populations more resilient to local disasters or food shortages. A Neanderthal group facing starvation might just die out. A sapiens group could call for help. There was also a biological difference. Neanderthals, with their stocky, muscular bodies, were metabolic powerhouses. They needed a lot of calories just to stay alive, significantly more than a leaner sapiens. One estimate suggests a Neanderthal male needed over 4,000 calories a day to survive in the cold. That's a huge amount of food. It's fine when game is plentiful, but when things get tough, that high-energy body becomes a liability. Sapiens, with their more efficient bodies, could survive on less. In a harsh Ice Age environment, efficiency is everything. And we might have simply had a numbers advantage. Some genetic studies suggest that the population of Neanderthals was always relatively small. They were spread thinly across a huge area. Sapiens, coming out of Africa, seem to have been much more numerous. Even if both groups were equally good at surviving, if one group is consistently having more babies, and those babies are surviving to have babies of their own, their population will grow. The other group's population will shrink in comparison. It becomes a simple demographic game. We might have just swamped them with our numbers. On top of all this, you have to add the biggest factor of all climate change. The period when Neanderthals disappeared, between about 40,000 and 30,000 years ago, was a time of extreme climate instability. The Ice Age wasn't a constant, stable cold. It had wild swings. There were periods called Heinrich events, where massive armadas of icebergs would break off from the ice sheets and float into the Atlantic. This would dump huge amounts of cold freshwater into the ocean, disrupting ocean currents and causing rapid, dramatic cooling on land. For a Neanderthal population that was already stretched thin and in competition with a new human species, these climate shocks would have been devastating. The forests, they knew, might have turned into treeless tundra in a few generations. The herds of animals they depended on might have moved or died out. Their world was changing under their feet, and it was changing fast. This probably didn't wipe them out all at once. It likely fragmented their populations. A group in what is now France would be cut off from a group in Spain. These small, isolated pockets of Neanderthals would be much more vulnerable. A single bad winter, a disease, or a lack of mates could be enough to finish them off. Sapiens, with our wider social networks and more adaptable technology, were probably better equipped to handle these rapid changes. We could move, we could trade, we could adapt. So you can start to see the picture. It's not a single cause. It's what some people call a death by 1,000 cuts. Imagine you are a small group of Neanderthals. The climate is getting colder and more unpredictable. The game is harder to find. Your high-energy bodies are screaming for food you can't get. And now, these new people have moved into the valley. They are weirdly skinny. They hunt with these strange throwing sticks, and they seem to be more successful than you are. Their population is growing. They have more kids, they talk to the people in the next valley. Slowly, over 100 years, your world shrinks. Your hunting grounds are smaller. You are pushed into more marginal lands, your group gets smaller, it's a slow, grinding process of being squeezed out. But there is one final, fascinating twist to this story, and it completely changes how we should think about the word extinction. For a long time, we thought the story ended there. We won, they lost. They vanished forever. But in the last decade or so, a revolution in genetics has given us a shocking epilogue. Scientists learned how to extract and read ancient DNA from Neanderthal bones. By comparing the Neanderthal genome to our own, they made a stunning discovery. Nearly everyone on the planet whose ancestry is from outside of Africa has a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in them, usually between 1% and 2%. What does this mean? It's undeniable proof that when our ancestors met Neanderthals, they didn't just fight or compete. They also interbred. They had children together. These children were raised in human societies, and they passed their mixed heritage on to the next generation, and the next all the way down to us. This complicates everything. If we carry their genes, did they really go extinct? In a biological sense, not completely. A part of them survived. It survived in us. The Neanderthal story didn't end 40,000 years ago. A small piece of it continues in billions of people alive today. That Neanderthal DNA isn't just junk either. Some of it seems to have been useful for our ancestors. Some of the genes are related to the immune system, helping modern humans adapt to diseases found in Europe and Asia. Other genes are related to skin and hair, perhaps helping us adapt to northern latitudes with less sun. Our ancestors met the Neanderthals, and they picked up some useful genetic tricks that have been honed over hundreds of thousands of years of life outside of Africa. This interbreeding also adds another layer to their disappearance. Maybe it wasn't just competition. Maybe it was also a process of assimilation. If a small, struggling Neanderthal group encountered a larger, more successful sapiens group, what might happen? Perhaps some of the Neanderthals were absorbed into the sapiens group. Over time, as the Neanderthal populations dwindled and the sapiens populations boomed, the Neanderthal genetic signature would become more and more diluted. They didn't just die out, they were also swallowed up by our gene pool. So, where does that leave us? Did we hunt Neanderthals to extinction? No. The evidence for direct, widespread warfare just isn't there. The story is much less dramatic and much more complex. It was a combination of factors, all piling on at once. The Neanderthals were a successful species, perfectly adapted to a certain kind of world. But that world changed. The climate became unstable, and a new, highly adaptable competitor arrived on the scene. That was us. We had some small but crucial advantages, slightly better technology that made hunting safer and more efficient. Larger social networks that provided a buffer against hard times, a more energy-efficient body. And perhaps, simply, we had more babies. Over thousands of years of sharing the same landscape, these small advantages snowballed. We slowly, incrementally squeezed them out. We were the invasive species, and in the midst of this long, slow competition, there were also moments of connection. Moments of interbreeding that left a permanent echo in our own DNA. So the disappearance of the Neanderthals wasn't a murder. It was more like an ecological tragedy. They were not a failure, they were a successful form of human who thrived for a very long time. They just had the bad luck to run into a new kind of human, a human that was multiplying rapidly and was just a little bit better at exploiting the environment and surviving the rapid changes of the Ice Age. We didn't need to hunt them down. We just needed to be ourselves. Our success, our expansion across the globe, was inextricably linked to their slow fade into the past. Their legacy isn't one of a brutish, failed experiment. It's the story of our closest relative, a story that is now, we know, a part of our own.